taking us through how a valve train works on this Honda GC160 engine. Today we're going to be looking at the valve train, which is underneath our valve cover here, thin piece of stamped aluminum. And what we're discussing is the components as well as the importance of the functioning or proper functioning of our valve train. All right, so what we need is, or what's helpful, is a socket wrench. If you have a socket extension, that's pretty handy too. A 10 millimeter. If you have a shallow socket or a deep socket, it doesn't really matter. I just like grabbing the deep sockets because with a 10 mil deep socket, you can take apart just about anything on this Honda engine here. Everything is, or almost everything is 10 mil. And a 13/16, for the sake of the demonstration, I'm going to be turning over the engine. It's a lot easier if we take the spark plug out and we have no compression in there. So we can hear right now, if I were to try and turn this over, it sort of wants to stop there and stop again. What we're hearing there and feeling there, and you feel quite a bit of tension in the cord, is compression in the engine. It's obviously not turning over or firing up. There's no gas in it. What we'll start with is disconnecting that spark plug for ourselves. And now what we can do, drop the extension on there. It just makes it a little easier taking the bolts on and off. Put it in the off position, a little crack. It's definitely probably not as tight as it should be. None of the bolts on this are probably tight as they should be, or way tighter than they should be. Spin this out the rest of the way with our hand. The reason for that is these have been taken apart many times and put back together many times by students. This is our spark plug. Everything looks pretty good there. Nice and fine and dandy. Next step we're going to go to is taking off the cylinder head. Again, I'm going to take that 13/16, go to our handy dandy 10 mil. This is going to take care of just about everything. We start by just knocking these loose a little. Now, Honda does some fun stuff with their engines. One thing they like to do, especially with their small engines, is not use paper gaskets. And they like to cut as many corners as possible to make things as cheap and lightweight as possible, while still maintaining a quality product. Dad's had a Honda mower and a Honda snowblower for how many years, and I don't even know if he's serviced them ever, which is not good, but something you can somehow pull off. I don't know how he does it. Valve cover. Now that we have that, the first time you take this off, will not come off super easily. There's this sealant going around here that you can see. It's thick, it's sort of rubbery, and it's very sticky. Again, they don't use a paper gasket up here. In fact, what you're going to notice if you're familiar with Briggs & Stratton engines is they sometimes use an aluminum crush gasket that's single use. This is also should be single use, but we just put it back on there, fire up the engine, make sure that the student's got it running right. Maybe it's not running as good as it should be without it, but for economic sake, we just go without it. But a Briggs engine and other engines probably use this aluminum gasket there. It's not totally necessary because you're going to notice on this engine the combustion chamber. We don't fully have access to it. It's actually integrated into the crankcase on this engine. A rather clever way. The piston gets inserted from the bottom as well as the valves, and that's about everything that's in there. You don't need anything else in there, right? So they found a way, Honda, in a rather clever sense, to integrate all this. Now what are we looking at here? You can see almost all the components just about. One component we're going to have a hard time seeing is the valves, but we can just see them, the very tops of them right down in here. My pencil's pointing to them. If you look through the valve spring to the center, the valve spring is the spring here, you can see the valve stem, allergies, in the center there. That valve stem is going down into the engine. We can see this turn over quite easily too, especially now that we moved the spark plug. There's no compression in the engine. So on the power stroke and on the compression stroke, it's not going to be pulling a vacuum or pushing, compressing any air. So this is going to turn over quite nicely. In fact, now you can hear it if I do give it a decent pull. it just wants to spin all day. The only really spot where we're getting any friction or forces is on this camshaft that's actually dropping a decent amount of friction because it's got to operate these valves. I'll do this a little bit slower so you guys can see it. Here we see the valves rocking, open, and closed. All right. Now, this valve, if you had to take a guess, you'd probably be right. This is the intake side of our engine. So this is our intake valve. We can tell that right away. Over here, our exhaust. So we have our exhaust valve. And it looks kind of weird. We always teach it intake, compression, power, exhaust. The exhaust sort of being the last stroke. But when you see this go around, it appears as though the exhaust valve opens first, and then the intake valve opens, and it sort of leaves you scratching your head like they taught me at intake, compression, power, exhaust. But why is the exhaust valve opening first? It's really just at the end of the cycle. It repeats itself right away. So it appears as though the exhaust valve opens first. Really, it's just ending the cycle. So we see that get pushed down and rocked out. Then it goes right over, opens up the intake, sucks air in. Once this cam is in that sort of top quarter part of its stroke, it's on the compression. And then we enter the power, and then we enter exhaust. Intake, compression, out of string in the power, continuing through the power, exhaust. All right. A unique thing Honda does here that we can see is we have I'll point out some of the components while we're at it, right? Should get that down. We have a timing belt, first off. That's timing belt, like a belt that goes around your waist. Timing belt. Camshaft. That's this plastic component right here with the gear on it. Honda's mastered this, again, economics. This is all plastic, this camshaft. There is a metal rod that runs down the middle of it, or from the back here to the front here, and it just rests on that. But it's a completely plastic camshaft other than that. These arms here, they extend down. I'll pull one out in just a minute for us to see. This is our rocker arm. Sometimes they call this, in this configuration like this, they call this a frog leg. It runs, so I hear, people tell me I should say, supposedly this is a quieter way of designing a valve train. Somehow it just runs a little quieter. It's not as noisy, supposedly. I don't know how much noise they're actually saving. And also, I hear it allows engines to rev a little higher when they do this. Something about it. I'm not exactly certain what the physics are behind that. I've never crunched the numbers or designed an engine, so I can't tell you. But supposedly, that's the scenario with it. And what we should notice is in any situation like this, there should be a little bit of give there. What I'm demonstrating here with these, that's probably too much give. There should be a little bit of a space when there's no pressure on the rocker arm, pushing it down to the valve. There should be just a little bit of a wiggle there. I'm guessing this is too much. And we're talking about a little bit of a difference. We're talking gap. We're talking about like 5 thousandths of an inch, or maybe 15 thousandths of an inch. We're not talking a whole lot. We're talking a very, very thin, almost a piece of paper fitting in there. All right. Then we've got, so we've covered this timing belt, camshaft, rocker arm or frog leg, and then our valve spring and our valve down the middle. Again, timing belt, camshaft, rocker arm, valve spring, valve. We'll take off one of these rocker arms to sort of demonstrate. Again, just a pin. If the valve cover is seated on there properly, the pin won't come out. Keeps the rocker arm in place. No need for a screw. Quicker assembly times, saves money. And this is our rocker arm. It sits in there like this. This is adjusting the gap to the valve. So as this wears potentially, you could bring it down lower. The top of the valve wears. You could bring this down lower and lower and lower to compensate for any wear in the engine, or anywhere on the camshaft too, or anywhere on the frog leg arm or rocker arm. So that's really kind of a clever little system, and it's just a little jam nut on a threaded bolt there, I guess you could call it, right? So it's rather ingenious, rather cheap again to do, but it works and it's proven. In here we've got our valve. We can see the top of it now and the valve spring. And all that happens is this just gets pushed down. You can push it down with your finger if you got a strong finger. I would take the valve clip off, but then my valve's going to drop down in my combustion chamber. Then I have to take the whole crankcase apart. We will see that another day, but that's the most parts of the inner workings and how it goes together. I can take off this one too and show you both sides. That's all there is to it. We can again pull this. Now this time we'll see the camshaft go around, but we will not see the valves go up and down because, you guessed it, the rocker arms are not in place. So what does this do for us, right? And here, by just taking those out, we have not actually adjusted the timing. So the important thing to talk about here is, next is what components control the valves when they open and close. We're looking at the camshaft. The camshaft opens or controls when the valves open and close. If we want to adjust that, if we want to see the two valves open for a longer period of time right between the intake and the exhaust stroke, that's called valve overlap. I'm getting a little technical here, but if we want to increase that at all, what we would be doing is adjusting our camshaft, or changing our camshaft. We'd have to put a whole new one in this case. And that's going to increase that valve overlap or decrease it if we want to decrease it or do anything else that we want to do with the timing. So what components control when the valves open would be our camshaft, and what brings them closed, you probably guessed it, it's a valve spring, all right? We're not applying any pressure to this. The spring is pulling it closed. What component connects the crankshaft to the camshaft? This is an important part too. Setting the timing is done by connecting the crankshaft, which you can see poking out the back of the engine here, all rusty-like, to the camshaft is, which you probably guessed earlier, from naming off the components, the timing belt. The timing belt in this engine, we'll talk about how to adjust the timing on these engines a little later, another lesson, but that keeps everything in sync. You'll notice we got teeth here. It's not a serpentine belt. It's not just a smooth belt that goes around. We need this to stay intact perfectly. In cars, if they don't have a timing belt, chances are they have a timing chain. Again, teeth keeps everything flowing at the same exact rate. That's very, very important here. Again, the timing belt connects the crankshaft to the camshaft. For every two revolutions the crankshaft makes, the camshaft is only going to make one revolution. So the piston's got to go up and down twice, crankshaft goes around twice, in order for the valves, each of the valves, open and close once. So the camshaft goes around once for every two strokes that the crankshaft goes around. Why is valve timing important? Really to coincide with everything that we've talked about, it keeps the engine running properly. It keeps compression when we need compression, and it keeps the intake valve open when we want to bring air in. It opens the exhaust valve to get exhaust out. So again, it's important because it keeps compression when we want compression or for combustion, and it allows air gas to come into the engine and push exhaust gas out of the engine. And that should do it for this lesson. If you wanted to put this back together, just drop a frog leg in there or a rocker arm, drop your pin in. In fact, I'm going to rotate this around just a little bit. Get that camshaft, that's a camshaft lobe, that egg shape there. Get that out of the way. Another thing you're going to notice about this engine that's rather clever, again, Honda's sort of ingenuity, is there's only one lobe on this single cam operating two overhead valves. This one lobe operates the exhaust and the intake all in one, which is again rather clever, minimizes the compactness of where everything needs to be. You make things smaller, fit more things in one space, you make things cheaper and saves Honda money, saves Honda time. Less parts equals really less product, less things can go wrong in the manufacturing process, less things can go wrong in the assembly process, less things can go wrong getting it to you, to your customer. So you have a better experience, Honda has a better experience. Really turns into a win-win for everyone. If you want to put this back together all the way, screw these bolts on. Probably want to snug them up tighter. What I'm going to do here, for the sake of this lesson, this is all we are really interested in. Put this back in here. Always, always, always start a spark plug with your fingers. If you want to just get it threaded smoothly, never, never, never put an impact gun on a spark plug unless you really like turning a wrench, want to get out a helicoil kit and mess with that, or possibly just break the spark plug and have yourself a whole world of problems. That's the lesson. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back with more good stuff in the future.